من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا بيننا شقيا ولا محروما إنك ولي ذلك والقادر عليه. We begin by seeking refuge and protection in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the first sealing and invoking peace and blessings upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our gathering here a gathering of mercy and our departure thereafter a departure that is protected from sin and error. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us that which benefit us and to benefit us with that He taught us and to increase us in knowledge. Allahumma ameen. Amma ba'd. Today inshallah we reflect upon one of the greatest hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is hadith number 12 for Al-Imam An-Nawawi, and this hadith is narrated in At-Tirmidhi. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam conveyed the message, or the hadith is conveyed by Abi Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Look how brief this hadith is. Look how brief this hadith is. قال من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. Subhanallah, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم يعني أوتي جوامع الكلم. جوامع الكلم means being able to say so much in so few words, which is beautiful because everyone can remember these few words. Everyone can remember these few words. So if you open a book, 100 pages, 200, 300, 400 pages, say, how much of this did you really retain? Maybe like 10%, 15, 20? But it's very simple to remember these words. من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. It is from the excellence of one's Islam to leave matters that are not part of their concern outside the circle of their concern. Which means, on the flip side, من سوء إسلام المرء أن يتدخل فيما لا يعنيه. It is from the opposite of ihsan is what? Su. Is that it is something bad. It is something, ugly, if you will. That one would interfere in matters that don't concern them. Which means their Islam is not on the up and up. Meaning that they are not busy with that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created them for. So to reflect on the first part, من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه, we know that Islam collectively is doing certain things and staying away from certain things. True or not? So when it comes to Iman, we are commanded to learn Tawheed. Conditions of Tawheed, negations of Tawheed, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, the oneness of the deity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the oneness of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the divine names and attributes, how to believe in the books, divine revelations, how to believe in the prophets and the messengers, peace be unto them, how to believe in the day of resurrection, how to believe predestination, preordination, how to believe in the angels. We are required to do that. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us only a certain time frame. When you go into a university or high school or college or whatever, and at the end of the semester or part of your quizzes, they say, okay, you have a test now, right? And this test has what? Unlimited time? There's a certain duration. There's a beginning and there's an end. Okay? That's life. Life is a test. And it has a beginning and it has an end. So therefore you're required to learn all these things because we said the number one condition of La ilaha illallah is what? Al-ilm. Al-munafi bil-jahl. To know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Man araf Allah fi dunya, ra'ahu fi al-akhirah. Whoever gets to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this dunya will see Him in the hereafter. Okay, and that goes to show that you're concerned about who your Creator is and how to worship Him and how to serve Him and how to please Him. That you get to know Him first, right? I mean, how do you please someone that you don't know? Right? It's not possible. It's inconceivable, right? So I have a certain time frame, and any distractions, and that's right? Interfering in matters that don't concern you. These are distractions. These are a waste of time. And just to reflect upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swore by in Surah Al-Asr. What did He swear by? He swore by time. He said, what Asr? What is time? It's not money. Time is not money, time is life. Time is life. And the real test, when your time is up, you're not among us anymore. When my time is up, you won't see me anymore. I'm gone. So when someone says, my money will be left behind. So if time was money, I'll be able to buy more time with my money, right? Not leave it behind. So time is life. يا ابن آدم لا أنت إلا أيام مجتمعة كلما ذهب بعضها ذهب بعضك. O son of Adam, you're nothing but a group of days. And every time a day, 2, a week, a month go away, do they come back? No. Which means part of me has gone by. A parted ways with part of me. That day will never return again. That month will never, that year will never return again. Right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swore by time, one of the scholars reflected on why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swore by time. He said, I didn't truly understand that until I saw a man selling ice. Not an ice machine. On a hot summer day, the man is selling ice. So that's his business, that's his capital, ice. And he would call on to people who said, Irhamu, have mercy on the one whose capital is melted away. He said, observing that, I understood what does it mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swore by time. Meaning that every time, a day go by, a week, a month, a year, right? That much has gone away from my life. To no return. حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت قال رب ارجعون. No way. لعلي أعمل صالحا فيما تركت. So, in other words, I have this much duration. I don't know how much it is. In a real life exam, a test in college or whatever, they tell you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with His infinite mercy, He did not tell us when is our final time. It could be any moment, could be any day, right? So therefore, we are commissioned to use this time to beautify our deen. We declared La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. We declared the Shahada. Now we need to learn the Shahada. Every single day. It's not something you just say and it's accepted. It has conditions. It has things that we may engage in that are negations. It means that we need to learn this one to do, right? The conditions, and we need to learn this one to stay away from. Otherwise we're wasting our time. Otherwise we are wasting our time. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you're also obligated to 5 pillars of Islam. شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله إقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة حج البيت وصيام رمضان. I need to learn how to do that. And I only have, and that's within the same duration. We're saying within the same lifespan, right? And then I need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with excellence. قال أخبرني عن الإحسان. قال أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Which means every day I need to make some level of progress. Is it possible that one would be in a standing still position every day? It's impossible. So you're either making progress or you're what? You're going back. You're retreating. There's no such a thing that I'm just at the same level last year as I am this year. And next year, if the next year comes, I'm going to be at the same level as last year. There's no way. There's no way. So you're either making progress, moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you're going backwards. إذا أردت أن تعرف عند الله مقامك فانظر فيما أقامك. We all want to know, what is my condition with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is my situation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is the real test? How do I know my status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Am I close to Him? Am I far away from Him? Am I somewhere in the middle? How do I know that? إذا أردت أن تعرف عند الله, if you want to know your status in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look at what you do every single day. Are you busy learning the deen? Are you busy memorizing the Quran, reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you busy learning the fiqh of our deen, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Are you busy with your ibadah? Are you busy with that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you increasing piety? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. If you make a mistake, do you immediately follow it with a hasana to wipe it out? Right? Is that what you're doing? Are you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala today from yesterday and the week before and the month before? If the answer is yes, then you are praised in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we can all gauge with that, right? We all know what we're doing every day. We all know if we're making progress or we're going back. True or not? Okay. So that's all within the same duration. So let's say I am commissioned now to study for my exam for college. Okay? And I have a month or 2 or 3 to study. And every day I say tomorrow. Next week. I'm going on a vacation. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And then comes, the month is up, or the 2 months are up, whatever time you have is up. And now, exam is tomorrow. And you're going to come and say what? What are you going to tell your teacher? What are you going to tell your professor? You have no excuse. You've been advised, there's an exam. It's going to last for 2 hours. It's on this subject matter, right? It's an open book exam, right? But you haven't taken the time to study. And now you come at the end and you want to search through the book. If you did not read that book, even if it's an open book, you're not going to be able to answer. Because you need to understand. True or not? And the more you understand and apply, the more you can advance. If you don't understand, you never get progress. Okay? من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. So what concerns me, if you think of just the second hadith we talked about, when Jibreel alayhi salam came to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the form of a man, while he was in the company of his students, his companions, and he said, what? He said, أخبرني عن Islam, and then أخبرني عن الإيمان, and then أخبرني عن الإحسان. So these are the 3 most important parts of our deen. Arkan al-Islam, Arkan al-Iman, and Ihsan. So if you perfect that as much as you can, as much as humanly possible, that means you have used your time correctly. What if you start now get into somebody else's business? What if you start, walk into the masjid, why the color of the carpet is green? Why the partitions are blue? Why the walls are beige? It's like, does that really concern you? Is this what you've been created for? Why you're wearing a jacket is too hot. Why you're wearing... Does that really concern you? It's often been said, إذا تكلمت فيما لا يعنيك سمعت ما لا يرضيك. If you speak in matters that don't concern you, you will hear things that you don't like. True or not? True or not? Luqman al-Hakim was asked, he said, of course we know, as far as the human standards are concerned, of good looks or whatever, Luqman al-Hakim did not have much of that. But he had a very fine status among people. And when he was asked, what have, led you to occupy this very fine status among, very respectable status, and, full of wisdom. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ مَن يَشَاءُ وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised him with this wisdom, and He says in the Quran that He gives wisdom to whoever He wills, and whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants wisdom, they have indeed been received so much good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So his answer was صدق الحديث. That concerns everybody, right? Who's a Muslim. Ada'u al-amana, trustworthiness. And the first amana we're going to be asked about on Judgment Day is what? Our salah. So amana is not just somebody leaving some gold or silver or money with you and you just return it. No. Your children are amana. Your spouse is an amana. Your salah is an amana. And you're going to be asking about all of that. And the covenant that we gave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet, that's a trust. That's amana. Okay? So we are busy trying to what? Make good on this trust. So when Luqman Hakim was asked what have granted you this very fine, high status among people, he said, Sidqul Hadith. Do we respect people who are truthful with us? Absolutely. Do we trust them? Absolutely. Do we put a lot of confidence in them? Absolutely. He said, وَأَدَاءُ الْأَمَانَةِ, and being trustworthy. And what do you think the third one was? تَرْكُ مَا لَا يَعْنِينَ. Things that don't concern me, I left them outside of the circle of concern. One other scholar was asked about, what is it that, that led you to occupy such high status? He said, the dhikrullah, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالذَّاكِرُونَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَالذَّاكِرَاتِ, those who frequently remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala among men and women. And the best remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what? The Quran, reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second place, الباقيات الصالحات, subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. And then, ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله, subhanallah bihamdih, subhanallah al-azim, right? One who says subhanallah bihamdih 100 times during the day, all of their sins have been expiated. Right? So you are doing what? You are coming closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Okay, well, I'm just a little human being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-exalted. So whether I remember Him or don't remember Him, it's not going to make any difference. In terms of, His status and His throne and His, and His majesty and His glory. It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But what's going to make difference with me is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mention me by name. When I remember Him, He will remember. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ. Okay? So He said, dhikrullah. And then the recitation of the Quran. And then مجالسة أهل العلم والصلاح. Meaning that being around people who are scholars, right? And people who are pious and righteous. الْمَرْءُ مَعْ مَنْ أَحَبَّ. So when you look at your social circle, you really need to evaluate, who do I hang around? Who are my friends? Who are my companions? Right? Because those are the ones who are going to be resurrected with on Judgment Day. So they're among the scholars and the pious and the righteous and the imams and the good people that we know. I want to be with them. Al-mar'u ma'man ahab. Everyone is resurrected with those whom they have loved in the dunya. Okay? And then another, he said, if I'm asked a question, I answer it. When someone comes to me with a question, I answer it to the best of my ability. And then, وَتَرْكُ مَا لَا يَعْنِينَ, leaving matters that they concern me outside. So, involving yourself or engaging yourself in matters that don't concern you, this is pure evil. Because number one is what? You're killing your life. What do you mean by that? You're wasting time. Time is life. So you're killing yourself gradually. Right? Number two, you earn a lot of enmity from other people. To the extent that people may just cut you off. Why? Because every time they see you, they'll be you again. He's going to be asking me questions that don't concern me. He's going to be asking about my private life. He's going to be, talking about things that are frivolous. Right? Talking about things that are nothing but, even if it's among the mubah. Because one who speaks frequently, we mentioned this in the Hadith of Isa alayhi salam, when he said that تكثير الكلام في غير ذكر الله فتقسو قلوبكم. That even if you speak in matters that are considered to be permissible, but you speak so much, okay, is that going to be in your scales of hasanat or scales of sayyi'at? In that which is mubah, is that going to be in your scales of hasanat or scales of sayyi'at? It could be both. Yeah. It depends on what you're talking about. But here's the unfortunate outcome of that. Isa alayhi salam says, فَتَقْسُوَ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Your hearts will harden. So even if it's not in your scales of sayyi'at, the immediate result is what? You're going to have a hard heart. وَإِنَّ الْقَلْبَ الْقَاسِي بَعِيدٌ عَنِ اللَّهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. What is the result of having a hard heart? It's going to put a huge distance between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like those who speak so much. Even we as human beings say this person talks too much. Right? Usually if someone doesn't talk much and they speak, you want to listen to them, right? You want to see what's on their mind. You want to see how you can benefit. But someone who's constantly speaking does not allow anyone else to, like they dominate the room, they dominate the social setting, right? And I was like, give somebody else a chance to speak, right? No, I know everything. So people, they turn away from that. But here in this hadith, Isa alayhi is saying, فَتَقْسُوَ قُلُوبُكُمْ وَإِنَّ الْقَلْبَ الْقَاسِي بَعِيدٌ عَنِ اللَّهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. A hard heart is so far removed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one who speaks frequently and speaks so much, they're bound to make mistakes. And in the authentic hadith, roughly translated, the Prophet ﷺ says that a person would speak in matters that would please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're not even paying any attention to what they're saying, right? And it will raise them into paradise so many ways. And a person who speaks so frequently without being mindful of what they say, right? They will say a word, fi sakhatillah, means that will anger Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will land in the hellfire to a very deep place. So we have to weigh our words, right? In the hadith of Mu'adh, when the Prophet ﷺ was telling about all the good things that will heavy up your scales of hasanat and bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, protect you from the hellfire, all of that. He said, Shall I tell you what would protect all of this huge investment for you? Mu'adh says, yes, indeed. قال أمسك عليك هذا. And he took his fingers and he held his tongue. He said, hold your tongue. Weigh your words before they exit your mouth. Once they exit your mouth, khalas, it's too late. You can't take them back. If he said the wrong thing, even if he apologized, the person in front of you is still hurt. True or not? Yeah. There's a little story about this man who wanted to teach this lesson to his son. He said, go to that fence and put a bunch of nails in it. So the young man said, yes, okay. He wanted to put a bunch of nails. He said, now go back and take these nails out. So he took the nails out. He said, what do you see left? He said, the holes. He said, that's exactly your words. You can say the wrong thing, right? And then you can try to take it back. It's too late. It left a hole in the hearts of people. You've hurt them. You've hurt their emotions. You've hurt their intelligence, right? You've damaged their ego. They're going to hold it against you. Right? Amsik alayka hada, hold back your tongue. So people who oftentimes do not leave matters that don't concern them outside the circle of their concern, they engage in hearsay, backbiting, buhtan. Sometimes when somebody tells you the story, right? And then they repeat it, and they add a little more to it. And they repeat it a third time, and they add a little more to it. Sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. They just keep on adding more and more to the story, which means you're telling lies. You're not being truthful. Because perhaps the first account was, to some degree, or to a large extent, true. Now you repeat it and you add to it. Where did the addition come from? And a third time you add more to it, and a fourth time. Right? And then, of course, if you're not busy doing the right thing, what are you busy doing? The wrong thing. You're busy doing the wrong thing. I promise you that. Because we are accountable for every passing minute that you've been granted on this life. In this life. You're accountable for that. Right? And we know this from the hadith. Where the Prophet ﷺ says that every soul will be asked about what? عن عمره فيما أفناه. I've given you life. What did you use it for? I've given you youthfulness. What did you use that for? I've given you wealth. What did you use that for? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, ما يلفظ من قول إلا لديه رقيب عتيد. We don't pay attention to what we say sometimes. But there's not a single word we utter except that it's recorded. Can you imagine that? The disbelievers will say on Judgment Day, مَا لِهَذَا الْكِتَابِ What? لَا يُغَادِرُ صَغِيرَةً وَلَا كَبِيرَةً إِلَّا أَحْصَاهَا. What is with this book? There's nothing, even the smallest of things, except it's recorded in there. That's the interpretation of مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. The angels are writing. Right? So you can see getting yourself into areas that don't concern you will only yield you bad results. Even if people don't react to it, even if people don't say anything, they're just going to turn away from you. And then of course you move from what? Backbiting. What does backbiting do to your hasanat? It burns it. To the extent on Judgment Day, those whom you backbitten, right? They will have deeds, rewards for deeds that they've never done. They say, oh Allah, where did that come from? I never did this. Say, this is from the person who committed backbiting against you. We have to settle the record. You backbite someone, on Judgment Day, they're going to take from your hasanat. Right? What's worse than that is what? Buhtan. What is buhtan? Buhtan has no true account whatsoever. It means that you are fabricating lies against a person, which is much worse than backbiting. Because when the companion asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, what if what I'm saying is true? Okay, well let's define ghiba first. What is ghiba?
Ghiba?
Yeah, backbiting, ghiba. What is the definition of that?
Talking something about someone which is true.
Which is true, which they don't like.
Of course, which they don't like.
So again, there are exceptions to ghiba, but in general, the definition is what? ذِكْرُ أَخَاكَ بِمَا يَكْرَهُ. Mentioning your Muslim brother or sister in that which they don't like. So the man said, "O Prophet of Allah, what is it true?" He said, if it's true, you've committed ghiba. And if it's untrue, you've committed buhtan, which is much worse. On a journey where the Prophet ﷺ was traveling with Abu Bakr and Umar, and they had a servant, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was still asleep, and Umar and Abu Bakr, they basically prepared the breakfast, right? And they looked at this young man, and one of them said, he thinks he's at his parents' house. He's here to serve us. Why is he still asleep? So anyways, they woke him up and they sent him to the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, we prepared the breakfast, but we have one item missing. The Prophet ﷺ, so they invited the Prophet ﷺ to come and have breakfast with them. The Prophet ﷺ said, go tell them that they already had breakfast. It's Abu Bakr and Umar. So when the young man came and he told them, the Prophet ﷺ said that you already ate. They were very alarmed. They said, "O Prophet of Allah, what did we eat?" He said, "You ate the flesh of your Muslim brother." Imagine, one could say, well, what's wrong with what they've done? They've hired the man to come and serve them, and he's still asleep, and they said, what does he think? He's at his parents' house, right? They didn't insult him, they didn't, right? That in and of itself, that was their breakfast. So they were eating the flesh of their Muslim brother, and they immediately repented. So sometimes we say things, people just, social gatherings, social setting, they start talking about this person and that person, and you're burning through your hasanat. And if you're not on Judgment Day, what happens? Many muflis, who is the broke one? The Sahaba said, the one who has no dirham and no dinar, doesn't have any money. He said no. And muflis, one who comes on Judgment Day with mountains of hasanat, and they've committed ghiba, and which is backbiting. They've committed buhtan, they've insulted people, they've killed this one, they've hurt this one, and then a long line of people. It's not to settle the account. A long line of people will stand and start taking from their hasanat. And if they run out, what happens? He or she start taking from their sayyi'at. So what happened to your investment? All your sadaqah, your salah, your zakah, your hajj, and your umrah, and all of that. Then the person is taken upon their face in the hellfire. So just imagine, just look at these few words. من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. If every one of us leaves matters that don't concern them outside the circle of concern, this would be a much, much better world. Right? You see, even at the government level, why you invaded that country? We want to teach them democracy. Really? We want them to become civilized. It's like we saw your civilization, we don't need it. Right? Keep it to yourself. Right? So at the individual level, at the government level, you name it. SubhanAllah. It is these words of the Prophet ﷺ. Busy yourself with that which really concerns you. With that's going to hit up your seers of hasanat. With that which is going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With that which is going to spare you from the punishment of the hellfire and enter you into Jannah. Right? So من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه ومن سوء إسلام المرء from the that which signifies that this person's Islam is no good is that they always interfere in things that don't matter. Now let's not confuse the subject with enjoying the good and forbidding the evil. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu stood on the member, he said, you recite an ayah in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you misunderstand. What is the ayah? يا الذين آمنوا عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. All you who believe, be concerned with yourselves. Those who've gone astray will not harm you. He said, you recite this ayah in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you misunderstand. What does that mean? It means that you think that you don't need to enjoy the good and forbid the evil. Or give da'wah to people. Or spread the message of Islam. That's a misunderstanding. You cannot say this is outside my circle of concern. Right? Because for you to be pious and righteous in yourself, you have to spread the message of Islam. You have to enjoy the good. You have to forbid the evil. And we know that from the story of the man who was a devotee. Devotee means somebody who was worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night. And he lived in a corrupted town. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to send the angels to destroy the town because they reached such a level of corruption that they broke their limits. So the angels came back and said, oh Allah, in it there's so and so. Who's a devotee? What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He said, Bihi fabda'u. Begin with him. Why? فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يَتَمَعَّرْ وَجْهَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He saw that the sanctity of the deen is being violated. Corruption is widely spread. Never enjoying the good. Never forbidden the evil. That's a misunderstanding of the ayah عَلَيْكُمْ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Yeah. لَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. You're not going to be accountable for what they've done after you've done your part. Right? And this, by the way, it doesn't have to be at the larger scale of a town or a city or a country. Even in your household. We look at our children when they are born, they're so innocent and beautiful and all of that, and we're so happy, right? And everybody's like, playing. Wallahi, akhi, children are the biggest responsibility in anybody's life. Your child, on Judgment Day, if you see your child doing the wrong thing and you say nothing, on Judgment Day, your child will go to you and say, you saw me doing this, you never stopped me. You're responsible. You saw me, I could not recite the Quran, you did not do anything. You're responsible. You saw me, whatever it is that I'm supposed to do, did not do, or I'm not supposed to do and I did, and you did not make a move. You did not say anything. You're responsible. Having children is a beautiful thing, but it's a huge responsibility. Allah is a huge responsibility. And before a child is asked about birr al-walidain, you know what birr al-walidain means, right? Being kind and compassionate towards your parents, right? And pious towards them. The parents are asked about the child. Did you give the child their rights? What is their right? To teach them the Quran, teach them the Sunnah, to teach them the knowledge of the Deen, to make sure that with whatever you have, talents and resources and knowledge and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, did you invest that in your child? To make sure that وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Did you supplicate for your child? Right? So it's a huge responsibility. Sometimes we take these matters lightly. What do I do? Khalas, let him go. Let her go. No. No. Istifraq al-wus'a, doing your very best, means that there's nothing else you can do. Just like Nuh alayhi salam, he was calling his son, right, to the very last minute. Even when the Tufan, when the flood came, what did he say? قال يا بني اركب معنا ولا تكن مع الكافرين. Oh my son, get on the ship with us, don't be among the disbelievers. وحال بينهما الموج فكان من المغرقين. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that this huge wave, which is like mountains, put between the father and the son. There was nothing the father could do anymore. True or not? This is istifraq al-wus'a. This is doing your very best. This is doing your very best. So our relationships are really built on rights and obligations. That's the bare minimum. اتقوا الظلم فإن الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة. Don't think because you have a lovely relationship with your spouse or with your child or with your father or whatever, on judgment they say, oh, here's some of my hasanat for you, you're prepared. The decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is destined for everyone. Not one single hasanah on the day of resurrection will be given as a favor. The father will say, I need that hasanah. The son will say, the daughter, the mother, I need that hasanah. So don't count on any of that. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Okay? So this is like one great hadith that we all need to just really memorize and live by every single day. Min husni is, if you see something and you're about to, interfere in somebody else's business, right? Unjustly, without just cause, remember the hadith and just hold yourself back. Because what you're going to hear is not what you're going to hear things that you're not going to like. Right? Min husni islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nih. What matters is for us to invest the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to the best of our ability. I'll give you an example of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal when it comes to dhikr Allah Azza wa Jalla. It was reported that he would sit in a gathering and oftentimes remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one time he went to the barber, and the barber is basically trying to, groom his beard and his mustache. And he would not stop remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he's moving his lips, right? So the barber said, can you hold off until I just trim your mustache? He said, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and you know how to do your job. So do it. He would sit in a gathering where people are, basically remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking matters of the deen. The moment they switch to the dunya, he covers his head and he keeps on doing his dhikr, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, you and I are not Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. However, we do the best we can to emulate. إنما العلم بالتعلم وإنما الحلم بالتحلم. Right? So in other words, I learn from these people. I listen to how they led their lives. I listen to how they made dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how they took their deen very seriously. To the last minute when Imam Ahmad was in his state of nazar, soul parting ways with the body, and his son is sitting there, and he would go, if you ever witness somebody who's, going through sakarat al-maut, sometimes they would go into a state of unconsciousness and then come back, right? And then as he went to that state, he would say, Laysa ba'd, laysa ba'd. And his son is trying to give him, teach him the Shahada. So when he woke up, his son told him, he said, I was giving you the Shahada, and he's saying, Laysa ba'd, laysa ba'd. He said, Iblis, Satan, la'anahullah. He came to me, and he said, oh, you escaped me, O Ahmed. And I was saying, Laysa ba'd. Why? Because the soul has not completely parted ways with the body. In other words, your tricks are not going to work on me. Satan is telling Imam Ahmed, because Satan will come to each and every one of us during the step of Nazar, and he will say, disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I will relieve you from what you're going through, which is an absolute lie. He is the master of deception. He is learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it extremely difficult for Satan to misguide you. And that's why it's mentioned in the hadith that one scholar is far more difficult for Satan to misguide than 1,000 devotees. Can you imagine the ratio, 1 to 1,000? Right? And these are not the average people, they're devotees. These are the worshipping of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala day and night. So this is the significance of knowledge. Okay? Which is the significance of knowing when to enjoy the good and how to, when to forbid the evil and how to, and to understand the fiqh behind that, to understand the messages of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand the weight of doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to understand the pitfalls that Satan may try to drag you in. For example, Satan will stand in your way every step of the way. Inna shaytana la yajri min ibni Adam majra dam. That Satan is there, right, doing his very best to misguide anyone and everyone to whatever extent they can, or he can. So therefore, once you understand Iblis, how Iblis will try to confuse you and create doubt in your mind and all of that, and you know how to make a comeback, then inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. They will have absolutely no influence over you. So sometimes you'll see people come into a fundraising dinner, right? With the good intention that they want to donate to the masjid, to a charitable cause, to whatever the case might be. And then Satan is unable to stop them from doing that. So what does he do? He tries to instill riyah into them. Say, okay, make sure everybody sees that check. Make sure you give it to so and so, and he knows you're making a contribution. Make sure, right? So that can be considered riyah, right? Depending on the intention of the person. And riyah nullifies the deed of a person. We talked about that with the first three categories of those who are thrown into the hellfire. Who are they? A scholar who basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him the knowledge and the understanding of the deen, the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And they use that to basically show people that they know something. They're knowledgeable people, so people can praise them and they can have their social status. MashaAllah, this person knows everything about the deen, right? And on Judgment Day, they're the first to be thrown to the hellfire. A second one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given abundance of wealth, right? And they spend it on the orphans and the widows and the masajid and the Islamic centers and the schools and all of that. But because of riyah, they wanted what? A good reputation. MashaAllah, the brother spending left and right. He's so generous. He's this, he's that, right? And on Judgment Day, he's brought into account, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I've given you abundance of wealth, what did you do with it? Oh Allah, I did not leave a good cause except I spent that money, for that good cause. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, Kidat, you lied. Just like the scholar was told, you lied. You did what you did, so people will say you're knowledgeable, and you did what you did, so people say you're generous. And you get your reward, they said that. So you have no reward today.
In Islam, we're supposed to protect our reputation, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. How does that go? Where do we balance?
The example of the Prophet ﷺ when he was doing i'tikaf in the masjid during Ramadan, and one of his spouses, Safiya, came, and she sat with him for about an hour or so. And then when the time comes for her to go back home, he left the masjid to go, take her to the house. So he saw a couple of men, a couple of Sahaba, and they were like, he was like a little Russian. So he saw a couple of them, he said, this is Safiya, my wife. They said, "O Prophet of Allah, we would not think of you in any form." So the Prophet ﷺ is doing what here? He's protecting his reputation, the reputation of his wife, by saying, "This is Safiya, don't go very far." He said, "Yeah, I feared for you that you would be misguided, that you start thinking ill of the Prophet ﷺ. And thinking ill of the Prophet ﷺ is an act of kufr, is an act of apostasy, right? So not only the Prophet ﷺ was protecting his reputation and his wife's reputation, also he's protecting these two men. Because Satan is going to come to them and say, "Oh, who's that woman that was with the Prophet ﷺ late at night?" He was doing that to Kafir. So absolutely, yeah. If someone sees that you're doing something that could be considered suspicious, you need to explain before they even ask. You need to explain. Similarly, the third category is the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him courage and skill at fighting, right? And all of that. And they went, until they were killed. In the side of people, they were martyred. But on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring them to account and say, "I've given you courage and I've given you skill and strength, and what did you do with it?" "Oh, I fought fi sabilillah until I was martyred." And the comment comes back, or the answer comes back, "Kadabt. You did this so people say you were brave." The Sahaba did not leave a question except that they asked the Prophet ﷺ that really concerns them. Because one of them asked the Prophet ﷺ, يُقاتل الرجل حمية, يُقاتل الرجل شجاعة, that a person will fight to protect his tribe. Hamiyya means to show that they're brave, to show their status among other men. Right? That's how they used to do it in the days of Jahiliyyah. Who is the martyr? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man qatala litakuna kalimatullahi hiya al-ulya." One who fights, so the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Almighty. And that's why everything we have can be sacrificed for the sake of the deen. Everything we have. Ourselves, our wealth, our positions, our children, our spouse can be sacrificed for the sake of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's something we need to learn how to protect. When shaitan comes to you, yeah, you can be coming to the masjid, for the halaqah, for the dars, for the salah, for the qiyam, right? And then as you enter, right, and people start to praise you, number one, you should not really be happy with that. Right? Because in a funeral, a group of the Sahaba start praising the person who just passed away. He was this, did a lot of salah, a lot of qiyam, a lot of fajr. And the Prophet ﷺ knew things that they did not know. Right? And one of which, if I recall correctly, he said, did he leave matters outside the circle of his concern, that don't concern him, outside the circle of his... So they start looking at each other. Then he said, then your friend is not what you think of him to be. It's not what you think of him to be. Because sometimes we especially in a funeral when the emotions are high, right? And we start, raising the person. Yes, antum shuhada Allah fil ard. You are the witnesses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. Right? But sometimes we start, I was listening to, by the way, these talks you were doing the funeral before or after, whatever, it's not really part of the sunnah. Right? But let's say sometimes it might be a good idea every now and then to remind people what have you, right? So I had this one person who his father passed away, and now he felt obligated to say a few words in front of people about his father, right? And he said he was in this scenario or in this aspect of his personality, he was like Abu Bakr, and in this aspect of his personality, he was like Umar, and this and he mentioned Uthman, and then Ali. I said, oh my God, what are you doing? Nobody would come remotely close to Abu Bakr, and Umar, and Uthman, and Ali. Nobody would be more. SubhanAllah, I've learned recently that there is a trust in the name of Uthman ibn Affan up until today. And now they're in the process of building a hotel because that trust is still in his account 1400 years later. Unbelievable. And then I'm going to compare myself to Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali. I was like, where am I? And I would only say, when a person was debating with a Christian, And the Christian is so accusing the Muslims that we do not respect Isa alayhi salam. So he said, if Isa was here today, I'd be honored to carry his shoes wherever he goes. He says one of the mighty messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same goes for Abu Bakr and all. These people have sacrificed so much for the sake of the deen. They've held themselves to such high standards that you and I would be like, if we lived at their time, they'd probably call us hypocrites. True or not? I mean, when somebody takes half of his wealth, Umar, to compete with, and that's how they used to compete. So today I'm going to take half of my wealth and devote that fi sabilillah, donate it fi sabilillah, and Abu Bakr is not going to win with me. And only to find Abu Bakr has given all of his wealth fi sabilillah. So who are you and I to compare ourselves to these people? Yeah, they're like the stars in the sky. They are humans. We're not saying we're not. Right? They had their faults, they had their shortcomings, but there's no comparison. Just to be rest assured, we're not there. Not even remotely. We still need a lot of work to do on ourselves. Starting with من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعمل. Means that I'm going to invest all of my time, energy, resources, worrying about what matters to me. The very purpose for which I've been created. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَقْرَبَكُم مِّنِّي يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَحَاسِبُكُمْ أَخْلَاقًا. I want to be close with the Prophet, which means I need to have what? The best of character. Right? أنا زعيم بيت في ربد الجنة لمن ترك لمن ترك الكذب ولو كان مازحا. One who leaves lying outside of their conversation, even if they're joking. And then in the latter part of the hadith, أنا زعيم بيت في أعلى الجنة. I'm to give a tour of a house in the highest levels of paradise to who? لمن حسن خلقه. One who beautifies their character. And that's why you see sometimes non-Muslims will look at a person and say, it doesn't matter how long their beard or their short, they say, I like this person's Islam. I don't like this person's Islam. Because even though they both pray, they both fast, this person is truthful, he's trustworthy, he's sincere when they give the advice. This person is probably entrenched in the dunya. Right? Yeah. I'll stop here, inshallah, and open the floor for any questions or comments. Yes.
Regarding backbiting and buhtan, this applies to disbeliever too.
Absolutely.
They will pay attention when
Absolutely.
they come to disbelief.
Absolutely. You can't go around speaking about your neighbors who are non-Muslims. Say bad things about them. Right? They have their sanctity. Imagine if they knew you as a Muslim backbiting. What do you think they're going to think of you? Is this what your deen teaches you? I'm your neighbor and your prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. He said, ما زال يوصيني بالجار حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه. That the Prophet ﷺ continued to command me to be kind and compassionate and all of that to my neighbor until I thought that the neighbor is going to get part of the inheritance. And then you start backbiting your colleague and your business associate and your co-worker and your neighbors and all of that, and you come and say, I'm a good Muslim. What good is about Islam? Is that what your deen teaches you? Of course, the sanctity of the Muslim is higher, but still, the non-Muslim have their sanctity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. He didn't say, قُولُوا لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ. He said, people at large. Tell them good things. And the best of things we can do is tell them is what? To say, La ilaha illallah. To say, Muhammad Rasulullah, to accept Islam. There's nothing better you can offer them. There's nothing better you can offer them. Right? So, this is part of loving for your Muslim brother and your non-Muslim brother, because there's a ukhuwah fi deen and a ukhuwah fi deen. Right? There's the brotherhood in Islam, the brotherhood in the mud. We all, كلكم لآدم وآدم من تراب. All of you come from Adam, and Adam is from, Turab. from dust. Yeah, in the days where anybody heard the term wasla? Where people get what they want. This is unfortunately a very popular word in the Gulf countries and in the Middle East in general. Wasla means somebody who's gonna basically help you overcome whatever transaction you wanna perform, or whatever rules you want to break, or whatever jobs you want to get, or business, or what have you, right? It's called wasla. So unfortunately, that was prevalent in some of the periods of the Islamic history. So a woman basically goes to the Khalifa, or the leader, and she knows that he's not going to see her unless she comes up with something that there's a connection between the two. So she approached the guard and she said, please tell him that his sister is at the door asking for permission to enter. Now the security officers, they know that he doesn't have any sisters. So they're waiting for him to do what? To issue some sort of verdict to penalize her, to imprison her, to punish her somehow. So he said, allow her to enter. So when she entered, he looks at her, he said, you and I know each other, brothers and sisters? She said, yes. We go back all the way to Adam alayhi salam. So we are brothers, and sisters. So he said, okay. He said, I'm going to be the first one to rekindle this blood relations. What is your need? So she articulated what she wanted to, ask for, in words that are just absolutely beautiful. She said, poverty has a taste that's very bitter. أوقفني وزوجي بباب الطلاق, made me and my husband at the gate or at the door of divorce. فهل عندكم من شيء ليوم الطلاق? Do you have something for the day of meeting, يوم الطلاق? ما عندكم ينفد وما عند الله باق. What you have in your possessions will run out, but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in His possession will never run out. So he was taken by the words of wisdom that she uttered. She said, repeat what you just said. So she repeated it a second time. He said, repeat it one more time. She said, no. He said, this much is fine. Beyond this, I feel like I'm being humiliated now. He said, that was not the intention. He said, by Allah, he said it 1,000 times. For each time, I'll give you 1,000 dirham. Because he just like, and then he basically gave her, the camels and the sheep and this and he gave her abundance of wealth and she left. Right? So, subhanAllah, you see that there's a certain level of persuasion. It's like, often they basically say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's very important. It's a very important social skill. Just like one of the leaders of the Muslims, when he had a dream, right? He brought someone to interpret the dream for him. And he said, oh, you're going to lose all of your family members. So he ordered him to be imprisoned or killed or something like that. It's not obviously. So he brought another dream interpreter and he said, this is what I had, tell me the interpretation. He said, MashaAllah, you're going to outlive all of your family members. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you abundance of time that you're going to be the last to live. You're going to outlive all of your family. Isn't that the same as what the first guy said? But it's how you say it. It's how you say it, not what you say. And that's very important. It has, and that's why ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة. A woman wanted to misguide a scholar, and she was married, and she had a very beautiful face. So she wanted to persuade this one scholar. So she took permission from her husband, and she went to the masjid, waiting for him to come out from the salah. Then when he came out, she said, I have a question for you. So she asked her a question, he answered it, and then she uncovered her face. She said, أنا مفتونة بك. He said, I have a crush on you. He said, okay. He said, do you see if I respond favorably to your request and the angel of death is waiting for both of us, what we're going to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do you see when the hour erupts and here we are, naked in front of people committing zina? Do you see when people go to Jannah and people go to hellfire and we don't know if we're going to end up in the hellfire? And then at that point, he shook her up. She woke up. So she went back to her husband and she became a very pious woman. Sawwama qawwama. Her husband said, what happened to you? Right? So, and subhanAllah, is what you say to people. Like, this scholar did not chastise her. He just started reminding her of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remind her of the day of resurrection. Remind her of Jannah and the hellfire. Remind her of the grave. Right? And all of that. Yeah. And then she became an upright woman and she repented. And this is what we need to do. It's a skill that you learn. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us by telling the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. The Sahaba with their status, the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in front of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, had you been harsh in the way you spoke, غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ, right? A person who is just like use words that are just unfriendly or unpleasant or any of that, they would have left you. He's the number one man. So if they were to leave the number one man, I'm not number one, I'm not even number a billion, right? So they would leave me too. They would leave you. They would leave anybody. Right? So this is a skill that we need to train ourselves. Is sort of like when we try to correct someone, timing is important. The way you say things is important. Showing that you're concerned. Advising them in private, not scandalize them in public, and all of that. Right? That's how you earn the hearts of people. That's why the Prophet ﷺ went to Mecca. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he went with what? His chin is like touching his chest. Showing humility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he granted him his victory. And then he basically, the pagans back then, they thought what? He's going to slaughter each and every one of them. He said, how many of them embrace Islam? First of which Abu Sufyan. Right? And many others. Yeah. This is a skill we really need to learn. الحكمة ضالة المؤمن أينما وجدها فهو أولى بها. Hikmah, wisdom, is like something that is precious that a believer lost and searching so hard for. So wherever they find it, فهو أولى بها, they're more worthy of it. The believer is more worthy of this wisdom. So yes, riba is awful, it's sinful behavior. It's like eating, أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا. Would you really like to see your Muslim brother or sister lying there dead and you begin to eat their meat? Right? And then that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end, فَكَرِهْتُمُ, you would dislike that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, on the points of the tarku ma la yani, is this only in the call, the discussions that's irrelevant, or something, for example, you watch in TV for 1.5 hours or 2 hours and match in football. This included in tarku ma la yani?
For me, yes. Absolutely. Akhi, again, I'm not against sports. Everybody really should, play some sort of sport or exercise, right? The Prophet ﷺ used to race with Aisha on the camel. That's a sport, right? So I'm not against that, but I'm against the agenda that is behind sports. I'm against the evil behind sports. I'm against the waste of money and time and the waste of salah behind sports. How many Muslims go to the stadium and for hours? How many of them pray? Right? So somebody was trying to make a comeback. They said, well, the attendees are like 1 million, maybe like 50,000 would not pray. I said, that's a small number, right? I said, well, if it was one that have lost their salah, according to the authentic hadith of Prophet ﷺ, that one who does not pray Asr on time for no good reason, in other words, they're not asleep, they did not forget, right? They're just sitting there idly wasting time, right? And Salat al-Asr has passed, the time is up. فَكَأَنَّمَا وَتَرَ مَالَهُ وَأَهْلَهُ, as if they've lost all of their wealth and all of their family members. It's just one single salah. And then, of course, you're going to go there, obviously, you're spending your hard-earned cash, right? And you're buying into all the propaganda they're trying to sell you, whatever. And these clubs and these politicians and these, club owners or whatever, they're making millions and billions of dollars. Again, I'm not telling you that what the players are doing is haram. And of course, sometimes fights erupt between Muslims, right? The Muslim teams are playing, and then the audience start to fight. We've seen that happen, right? And people got killed, and people got injured. How do you justify that on Judgment Day? Yeah. So. Again, I'm not saying it's haram, but there's so many haram things that take place in the process because of the ignorance of people. Because of the ignorance of people. Because of the fact that people are wasting time and money and creating enmity between, two countries or whatever. I mean, if I'm talking about the public now, forget about politicians. The public are taking a stance against each other. It's like what happened to the unity. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this deen for us to unite us. And we're going to use soccer and basketball and football and whatever to divide us. And by the way, that's a form of shirk. That's a form of shirk. In Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مُنِيبِينَ إِلَيْهِ وَاتَّقُوهُ وَلَا تَكُونُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Munibin ilayhi, instead of obedience, and return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَاتَّقُوهُ, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not become among the mushriks. What type of shirk here? مِنَ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِمْ فَرِحُونَ. From those who divided their deen for whatever reason. They divided their deen, they divided themselves, and every group is happy with what they have. Right? Every group is happy with what they have. So that's a form of shirk. Stop here, inshallah. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك ونتوب اليك. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معاصيك، ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك، ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا. ومتعنا اللهم باسماعنا وابصارنا وقواتنا ابدا ما احييتنا، واجعله الوارث منا، واجعل ثارنا على من ظلمنا، ولا تجعل الدنيا اكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا الى النار مصيرنا. اللهم انا نعوذ برضاك من سخطك وبمعافاتك من عقوبتك، ونعوذ بك منك لا نحصي عليك ثناء حسنا انت كما اثنيت على نفسك. اللهم اسالك الرضا بعد القضاء، وبعد الحياه بعد الممات، والنظر الى وجهك الكريم في غير الضراء المضره ولا فتنه مضله لكون ذلك والقادر عليه. اللهم انت ربنا لا اله الا انت خلقتنا ونحن عبيدك، ونحن على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعنا. نعوذ بك من شر ما صنعنا، نبوء لك بنعمك علينا ونبوء بذنوبنا، فاغفر لنا فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام